part number 7 of the Circle of Life. And we're going to talk just a little bit about the angels eating the food of men, and then men eating the food of angels. But before we do that, I'd just like to remind you where historically the angels became men. Right about here, the dispensation of conscience, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, is when the sons of God, now the sons of God were a contingent of angels, a garrison that was assigned to earth to keep the way of the tree of life. They were established on the east of Eden, and they had there a flaming sword. And it was at this place, under the dispensation of conscience, where men would gather to go to church. It's where Cain offered his sacrifice. It's where Abel offered his sacrifice. It's where other men came to worship the Lord. They couldn't get into Eden. They didn't have part of the tree of life, but still that's where they came. And there evidently was an altar there. And before this flaming sword, which is simply an upside down cross, there were two angels that would, from time to time, be relieved by other angels in that garrison. So there were several there. But as the children began to grow up at this point, there were some awfully pretty young ladies that these angels saw as they came to church. And the angels decided that they would rather take human form and cohabit with these ladies. Now, as a result, as we saw this morning, we have the two groups, the Nephilim and the Rephaim. And because of that, the earth became corrupt genetically, or was fast becoming corrupt, and all true or original life forms were being annihilated and becoming extinct. The word violence is a word that characterizes the age of Noah. And what that means was that evidently the life forms that came from this ungodly union began eating other life forms. And so God, to prevent the extinction of the original animals, had to bring in the flood. So that's where the angels originally became men, and a terrible, tragic result. But about 24 years into the dispensation of promise, the angels became men again. And by the way, it was 24 years into the dispensation of promise when what two cities were destroyed? Sodom and Gomorrah. Why? Because you have a promised seed. And the men of Sodom not only were corrupting other people, but they wanted to corrupt even angels. And that would have been a tragedy had they influenced these angels to commit that particular sin. And the seed of Abraham would have once again been threatened with extinction and annihilation. And that's why there was a terrible judgment in both instances. But just prior to that, the angels appeared with Jesus Christ to Abraham, and guess what they did? They came in under his tent roof. That means they came in under his authority, and they took meat from his hand. And here is where angels, for the first and last time, as far as we know, actually ate human food, except in Hebrews we're told that some entertained angels unaware. Now, from that I gather that angels made visitations to earth in the form of men, and others entertained them and they ate meat. But we have no record of it in the scriptures, just that reference. But here we do have a record of where angels ate the food of men. Now, it's no accident that here is the place where they ate it. Why? Abraham had been promised a seed. His seed was going to rule the world. It was going to have the land, from that a headquarters, a global government, and that he was going to have a seed that would eventually be king over the world. And guess what? In Genesis 17, he gets circumcision, And he gets Isaac named, and just shortly after that, Jesus Christ appears to him with these two angels. And the angels come in under his roof. They were blessed, actually, in Abraham, or they became subservient to him. Now, in the book of Hebrews, chapter 2, this is what it says, starting with verse number 5. For unto the angels hath he not put in subjection the world to come, whereof we speak. Now, who is he going to put the world under the domination of? Man. But what man, what family, what nation? It's Abraham, his children, his seed, and the nation of Israel. But one in a certain place testified, saying, What is man that thou art mindful of him? Or the Son of Man that thou visitest him? You made him a little lower than the angels, and you crowned him with glory and honor, and did set him over the works of thy hands. And you put all things in subjection under his feet. Now, if you'll turn to the last part of this chapter, it says in verse number 16, and here's where you get the connection as to why the angels took the bread and the meat from Abraham. They were placing themselves in subjection to him in actuality, because he is the one through whom is going to bring the leader that's going to rule the world. The angels don't have it. Now, the angels were there as a protective guard to Jesus Christ, who appeared to him and was with him there. But the point is that the angels didn't have the authority and came under the authority of Abraham, and therefore had to take whatever he gave. Beggars, in that sense, could not be choosers, and they were subject to Abraham. Verse 16, For verily Jesus Christ took not on him the nature of angels, because angels aren't going to rule in eternity future. Angels forfeited their blessing, their dominion, their crowns, their thrones. All of it is gone. And so when these angels assumed human form right after Abraham got the covenant and circumcision and Isaac was named, here they appear with Jesus Christ and come under his tent and receive blessing from the hand, refreshment from the hand of Abraham. But note the last part of verse 16. But he took on him the seed of Abraham. And so, as we have noted, therefore, angels ate human food. Why? Because it shows that they were demoted in the angelic conflict, and that they were now to be submissive to a man and ultimately his seed. And once the earth had millions of angels on it, now it's going to be replaced with millions of Jews and those nations associated with them. And the angels are going to be their servants. They no longer are going to be kings. They're going to be the servants of those who are heirs of salvation. Turn with me now to Psalms 78. Now, just as we had a contrast with the angels and humans in the first part of this illustration, there is a contrast between angels and humans in the last part of this illustration. One has to do with sex, the other has to do with food. Psalm 78 and verse number 25. Well, let's look at verse 23. Though God had commanded the clouds from above and opened the doors of heaven and rained down manna upon them to eat, and had given them of the corn of heaven. Now note verse number 25. Man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. And the word meat there is a reference back to the manna, because sometimes meat can mean strictly grain, bread, fruit, herbs, and sometimes meat can mean flesh. The context determines it. But in this particular case, note the reverse order. Here, angels ate human food because they had to receive it from Abraham, who will eventually be their master forever. It's Abraham and his seed that they're going to be subservient to. Just like when we get into the second heaven, they're going to serve us simply because of the angelic conflict. But on the other hand, when humans ate angel food, it showed a promotion in the angelic conflict. Now, just let me ask you, whose seed was it that received angels' food? Abraham's seed. Did any Gentiles ever eat manna? They did not, unless they were associated with Israel. That's the only way they got their manna in what's called the mixed multitude there. But for 40 years, Israel ate food from heaven. That shows their promotion in the angelic conflict. Now, I'll show you what I mean here if you'll turn back with me to Exodus 16. Exodus 16. Israel is God's royal nation on earth. Therefore, rank has its privileges. It's lonely at the top, but you eat better there. So, Exodus 16, and start with verse number 33. And Moses said to Aaron, "Take a pot, and put an omer full of manna therein, and lay it up before the Lord to be kept for your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. And the children of Israel did eat manna 40 years until they came to the land." They did eat manna till they came to the border of Canaan. Now, so important was this manna that God decided to preserve a pot full of this thing forever, for all practical intents and purposes, wherever the Ark of the Covenant is right now. Guess what it has in it? A pot of manna. Now, what other food could be preserved for so long without spoiling, without refrigeration? Someday when we get into the doctrine of manna, you'll see that on some occasions it did spoil, and on some occasions it was preserved. On some occasions you could only keep it a day. On other occasions you could keep it for 2 days. Sometimes if you gathered too much, it would spoil and smell bad in your tent. It would outdo the camels and the other animals. On the other hand, it would keep for a long period of time. But God thought this such a great thing that he laid it up before the testimony. Now, what is that? It is the Ark of the Covenant and the testimony that God is Israel's God, and that he is the one who has kept Israel and has made them the royal family. Who is it that is the earthly peculiar people? It's Israel. Who is it that is a kingdom of priests to the world? It's Israel. Who is it that has the Davidic dynasty that will rule the world? It's Israel. Who is it, therefore, that gets the food from heaven, the food of angels? It's Israel, and Israel exclusively. Turn with me to Hebrews chapter 9. Hebrews chapter 9. And in verse number 4, where it says, "In the holiest of all it had the golden censer, and then the Ark of the Covenant, which was in the Holy of Holies, overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant, and over it the cherubims of glory, shadowing the mercy seat, of which we cannot now speak particularly." Now, here's what it was. Remember the 2 angels that accompanied Jesus Christ? They came down and they ate food, all right? But on the other hand, angels, pictured by the cherubim above the mercy seat, were also to be witnesses. We're told in 1 Peter that angels, and the Greek word that is used actually is the word for rubberneck. In other words, sometimes they look down from heaven and people get saved and they rubberneck. They just can't figure this out. Salvation is so great because they've never experienced salvation, but yet they look and God loved man so much, he sent his son, they believe on his son and they're saved, and they say, man alive. There's joy in the presence of the angels because they rubberneck down there and they figure it out that somebody has chosen positively for God and they're happy over. So we've got a whole bunch of rubbernecking angels. Now, I don't have to tell any of you women that you've got your little kitchen window and you hear a noise out there. You want to spy on the neighbors, and you just get up on your tippy toes there and you begin rubbernecking. What in the world are they doing over there? Okay, well, probably some of you don't do that. But the angels do, because they're interested in what happens to man. Well, God put two angels here, not just to be protectors of the mercy seat where the blood is applied and where God and man meet in the Holy of Holies, but they are there to witness. It is called the Ark of the Testimony. Now, what does it have in it? Let's take a look. First of all, it is laid... wherein was the golden pot that had manna. Now this is important because the various items associated with the tabernacle spoke of the Lord Jesus Christ. If it was wood, it spoke of his humanity. If it was gold, it spoke of his deity. And of course, the bread speaks of his person being broken for the world, and him being the bread of life. But let's just look at these various things for a minute, and we'll go in reverse order here. Last part of verse 4. The tables of the covenant. Now, the tables of the covenant were the broken tables of the law. That had to be there in the Ark of the Covenant as a testimony. Remember, it was the Ark of the Testimony. Well, what was it testifying? Moses went up and Israel said, all that the Lord has said we will do. He goes up and gets the tablets of the law. He comes back down and guess what they're doing? Worshiping the golden calf, having an orgy and a drunken party and brawl and so forth. And so you know what he does? The meekest man in the world at that time becomes Superman and mega angry, raises them up and throws the tablets down and breaks them. Well, somebody took a pan and a broom and scooped them up, and we now have the broken pieces of the law in the Ark of the Covenant, because it's a testimony that Israel didn't keep the law. The law gave the knowledge of sin. The law was not to, in actuality, bring salvation. It was the blood applied on the mercy seat that satisfied God's righteousness for the broken law that was there. So we have that included. Only 3 things included. That's why this business of humans eating angel food is so important. The next thing is, as we're going up the verse, Aaron's rod that budded. Now, if you come to the mercy seat, it is wood overlaid with gold. And remember the symbolism. The wood is the humanity of Christ. The gold is his deity. He was both God and man in one person. However, when you have Aaron's staff or Aaron's rod, it is completely what? Wood. There's no gold on it. Why? Because the rod here symbolizes a dead stick. It was once part of a living tree, but once you disassociate it from its root system and so forth, it became a dead stick. And a dead stick, for all practical intents and purposes, cannot be revived and bring back the life in it. Let's graft back into the tree. So he has a dead stick that is all wood. Now, the stick represents Jesus Christ and his humanity that died. Why isn't there any gold on this stick? Deity cannot die. you see. Only his humanity died. His deity never ceased to exist. His deity never experienced death. It was his humanity that was dead. Now here comes a bunch of guys who decide they're going to rebel against Moses and Aaron, and they want the priesthood. And God says, well, I've already picked Aaron. And they said, that doesn't matter. I want it. And God said, all right, here's what you do. All of you have a walking stick. All of you have a shepherd's staff. Put them in front of the tabernacle, just stick them right down in the ground and wait till overnight, and you'll see which one of these men that I have picked. Okay? It's the divinely picked representative. Of course, Aaron, the temporary national priesthood of Israel, but Jesus Christ with the universal priesthood after the order of Melchizedek. So these are the issues here. And so you have however many staffs or rods in the ground. The next morning, guess what happened? Aaron's rod budded. Aaron's rod was brought back to life. And that is indicative of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He was dead in his humanity, but the man that God has chosen, as he did Aaron in this sense, is a man who can bring life out of death, who comes back to life. And not only did it bud, but it gave forth fruit, or this particular case, of almonds. And it brought forth a yield on that stick. And so naturally, no one else's stick did this. And they knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that the only one that could bring that stick back to life was God himself. And it was Aaron's rod that budded, indicating divinely chosen leadership, the death of Christ in his humanity, and the bringing back to life. So guess where that stick was placed? In the Ark of the Covenant. All right? Now, note the reversal here. Wherein was the golden pot that had manna? What is missing here in the element? It's the element of wood. It's something that God himself provided from his table. It is a royal food as such, divinely given, divinely made for a special group of people, those that were the kings of the universe, the angels. Angels' food that they used in their banquets, at their table and so forth. But where is it now located? It is located in the Ark of the Covenant for a testimony that Israel is God's royal people on earth, and that he, even prior to the kingdom, has shared with them the very bread of heaven on earth, angel food. So as we move ahead, I hope that you will remember these human angelic contrasts here and coordinated efforts, all the way from the male angels to the female humans and their mongrelized seed, reversing that with male humans who lusted after male angels, producing no seed. Of course, there was no fall, but that's what the result would have been. Then when angels ate human food, it showed, I'm now your servant, Abraham. I've come down to protect Jesus Christ, who will ultimately be your son, but I'm here under your roof. It was an act of submission on the part of the angels. And then the fact that humans ate angel food shows that they were promoted in the angelic conflict. Manna in a golden pot was one of the three instruments in the Ark of the Testimony. Man has broken the law, but God has provided satisfaction for it. Jesus Christ was dead, but he is going to arise again with the stones, and now with Aaron's rod that budded, and then Israel being presented with the food of angels is God's choosing them as his royal nation forever. Okay, let's go now to the book of Genesis once again. Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6. And what we want to do here is, just for the remaining time that we have in this hour, to familiarize you with what we call divine covenants with animals. And there are 3 of them. The first covenant that God made with animals was a temporary thing. It wasn't meant to last throughout human history for every species of animal. But it was to last through the times of the flood. The covenant was a non-extinction covenant. That's why, of course, animals were not made meat eaters until after the animals began to multiply in the dispensation of human government. They could not become extinct under divine order. Chapter 6, verse 17. Now, here is part of the Noahic covenant before the Noahic covenant was given in Genesis chapter 9. Now, what I mean by that is usually we talk about the Noahic covenant as there will no longer be a flood, but there was a covenant given to Abraham and to the animals before the flood. And this is it. And behold, I, this is verse 17, chapter 6, even I to bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh under heaven. So every animal, wherever you're located, remember that phrase? We talked about it. If it's under the heaven, it means that it's someplace on the face of the earth. Everything on earth is under the heaven. And so it is a universal type phrase. Everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee will I establish my covenant. Now remember, in chapter 9 he says, I'm going to give you a covenant. In chapter 9, what is the token of the covenant of God to Noah? It's the rainbow. But this is before the rainbow. This is while the storm clouds are gathering. God made a covenant with Abraham. And thou shalt come into the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your wives with thee. And note, verse 19. Here is where the animals were given a covenant of God. Every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort, shalt thou bring into the ark to keep them alive. And it tells them what they should be, male and female, after their kind, and so forth. And so the animals, according to verse number 19, had a covenant given to them. Now, what was that? That if they were in the ark, they would not become extinct in their species. Now, that lets us know that God doesn't necessarily want certain species to become extinct. But he was going to make everything else extinct on the face of the planet except for those that still carried the tradition of an after their kind, the law of after their kind reproduction. So we have the temporary non-extinction covenant for animals. Now let's go to chapter 9. And I'm sure just before they're tucked in at night, when little bunny rabbits say their prayers and little, they breathe a sigh of relief that this is not going to happen. What's that? That there's going to be another flood. All right? Chapter 9, and we'll start with verse number 8. God spoke to Noah and said to his sons with him, Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your seed after you. And note verse 10. Again, he refers to the animals. And with every living thing that is with you, fowl, cattle, beast of the earth, all that go out of the ark, and to every beast of the earth. Noah had a second covenant given to him, one before the flood, one after the flood. The one before said, I'm going to preserve you, Abraham, human beings, and every purebred animal that's on the ark. He made a covenant with the animals. They would not become extinct in that flood. I mean, the very integrity of God was placed on the line there. There wasn't anything that nature could throw at that ark that would make it sink. God himself was holding it up. He shut the door, sealed them in, and he was preserving them. And every animal in there had this non-extinction covenant given to them. But now afterwards, God said, okay, this is a pretty terrible thing. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a second covenant with Noah and with the animals. And this covenant, verse 11, will be, neither shall all flesh, which included the animals, be cut off any more by the waters of the flood. Neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. We can come down to, let's go to verse 12. This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you. And note this phrase, it's very unusual. God actually is addressing the animals here. And every living creature that is with you for a perpetual generation. So, I'm sure that the animals do not contemplate the fact that every time they see a rainbow, it's not going to flood. But yet, in actuality, that's what he's doing here. He's saying, even though they may not understand, I'm doing it for their benefit. I'm not going to make them extinct through a flood anymore. They never have to worry about that. Again, in verse 15, he says it. I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. Verse 16, last part of the verse. And every living creature of all flesh. Verse 17, again, I've established it between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. Now, the reason that he does that is because he is being redundant for a purpose. I'm not going to do it to you or the animals, and that is send a flood. And so we call this the Noahic non-diluvian. Now, the word deluge there is used with regard to the flood. If it's before the flood, theologically, we call that an antediluvian society, before the deluge. If it's after the flood, we call it a post-diluvian society. That is after the deluge. Here we're simply coining another phrase, calling it the non-diluvian covenant, because that's exactly what it is. No more floods. All right. Let's go from here to the book of Hosea. To help you out, it is the first book after Daniel. I was halfway through seminary before I memorized the minor prophets. Hosea, chapter 2, and verse number 18. Now, this third covenant is very important, where the one promises them protection through the flood, the one promises protection from a universal flood after Noah's deluge. We now have something that God is going to do for the animals in the kingdom. And that is, he's going to make a covenant of peace with them. Now, here's where you can begin to see, once again, why God allowed some animals to eat other animals in this so-called circle of life. And that is because there is no peace as long as you've got a predator. I mean, all of us realize that. If there's somebody lurking outside of our house and just waiting to break through the window and get in there and get all of our stuff and kill us and so forth, you sleep with one eye open. You don't get a good night's rest because there's no peace of mind. There's no security. Somebody that is sick in the mind is going to pounce on you, hoping to destroy you, to take your stuff. Now, that's what is shown here when you have, a lion trying to get a zebra or, whatever, and kill it and eat it. The first thing you have to do if you're going to eat something is to kill it first. And that shows aggressiveness. That shows that that thing on the lion's mind is a lust pattern. Well, again, it's because he's hungry, but there's a lust pattern there. Why is he looking at that zebra? Is he lusting for the substance of that zebra? If he hadn't eaten in 2 or 3 days, that's what he's doing. Is it a normal thing? Yes, but after 2 or 3 days, there haven't been many zebras this way. This is the first zebra in a long time. Does he have an inordinate desire for that zebra? Would you have an inordinate desire for that zebra? Well, sure you would. Well, maybe not a zebra, but if it were a cow or something like that, yes. You're hungry. So what do you have to do? You want to consume the flesh of that zebra upon your lust at this point. And that's, I'm stretching the illustration, but that's basically what it is. So the lion goes after the zebra, and what's the first thing he has to do to it? He has to kill another life form. And that shows the detrimental results of sin on the earth. If God allows sin, if God would allow Satan to just roam free, eventually as a predator, he would begin pouncing on people to get their things. And what was he first from the beginning? He was a murderer from the beginning. He began killing people to consume it upon his lust, to get the spoil of their goods. So what's the first thing God does when the Prince of Peace comes back and establishes a society in harmony with one another, God and nature? He signs a peace pact with the animals. All right, chapter 2, verse 18, book of Hosea. In that day, it's a reference to the kingdom, will I make a covenant for them, Israel, with the beasts of the field, with the fowls of heaven, and with the creeping things of the ground. That's pretty much everything that was on Noah's Ark. All right? And I will break the bow and the sword and the battle out of the earth, and I will make them all, to lie down safely. Isaiah chapter 35. Isaiah chapter 35. And verse number 9. In Isaiah 35:9, you have Israel established back in the land, and you have what's called the highway of holiness from Jerusalem back to the millennial temple. Now, you're going to walk without weapons in this highway of holiness. You're going to be walking in areas that are, as such, unprotected. Why aren't there any weapons there? They beat their swords into plowshares and into pruning hooks. They're, well, for the life of me, it just slipped beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Okay, the spears, yes, that's the other weapon. They're implements of what? Agriculture now. For once you're going to take a weapon of war, the sword and the spear, and make it an implement of agriculture. You no longer need a weapon. The Prince of Peace has come and established universal peace. But now, they're going to walk unprotected from Jerusalem to the temple. And what could be there? What could be a disastrous thing if you had no weapon and a wild animal attacked you? They won't. Why? Because of the covenant of peace. No lion shall be there, nor any ravenous beast shall go up thereon. It shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. Ezekiel 34. Ezekiel 34. We'll be here and in Romans, and then we're done. Ezekiel 34, verse number 25. Again, reference to a covenant of peace, a non-aggression pact with the animals. And I will make with them a covenant of peace, and will cause evil beasts to cease out of the land. and they shall dwell safely in the wilderness and sleep in the woods. I think Miss Heather Harrington must have gotten sick, so we need to pray for her. She had to leave the service just a little bit ago, but she mentioned the fact that when all of the kids, they were rolling in the grass, and some of the kids they were calling Spot because of all the chiggers that had gotten them. If I were going to roll in the grass, guess what kind of a covenant I would want with all those chiggers? I would want a peace pact. Don't eat me. All right. Verse number 28. And they shall no more be a prey to the heathen, neither shall the beast of the land devour them, but they shall dwell safely, and none shall make them afraid. That's where the lion and the lamb are together, and so forth, and the cow and the bear, and a little child shall lead them. It's because God makes with the animals a peace pact, a non-aggression pact. You don't eat men anymore, and you don't eat one another anymore. All right, Romans 8. And note verse number 19. Remember, Romans 8 follows Romans 5, where it talks about sin entering the world and death by sin. And also a reference to the fact that all of creation was cursed. The ground was cursed. Therefore, man's body was also cursed because it came from the dust of the ground. But guess what other bodies came from the dust of the ground? Genesis chapter 2 tells us that God formed every animal from the dust of the earth. So when he cursed the ground and when he cursed the body of man, guess whose bodies got cursed? Subject to the curse universally around the world. The animals did. And that's why verse 19 says, for the earnest expectation of the creature, which includes the animals, waits for the manifestation of the sons of God. What's that? The lifting of the curse. For the creature was made subject to emptiness, not willingly. Those brute beasts didn't sin. It was a result of Adam's sin. But God had to include them now in an imperfect environment and curse them as well because of Adam, by reason of him who has subjected the same in hope. Because creation itself, including the animals, shall one day be delivered from the bondage of corruption. Lions will not need to eat meat anymore if they're not cursed. They can go back to eating straw like an ox. That's what's going to happen. But it's only going to come when the Prince of Peace brings peace to the world and everything lives in harmony. And that's why God comes to the animals and said, hey, look, fellas, you've been eating meat. Let's go back to the way it originally was. And you eat of the fruit of the field. For we know that the whole creation groans and travails and pains together until now. They're waiting, last part of verse 23, for the adoption, that is the redemption of the body. When the earth and the universe, and especially the sons of God, get their glorified bodies and the curse is removed, as it will be in the kingdom, the animals too will go back to living in peace and harmony, in safety, in security. There'll be no stress on the animals for fear that some predator is going to kill them and consume them just simply to heap it upon their lusts.